Today we're going to do 2-7 solving rational equations. And in order to solve a rational equation, our goal is to get rid of the denominator. And in order to get rid of the denominator, we're going to have to multiply by our least common denominator. We'll go over that in our examples, but remember that our goal here in this section is to get rid of our denominator. Once we get rid of our denominator, then we're going to be able to solve our equation. First, we have x plus 3 divided by x equals 4. So this is a rational equation because we have an x in our denominator, and in order to get rid of our denominator, we are currently dividing by x, so we are going to multiply by x. You have to multiply by x to every single term. And on both sides of the equation. So x times x would be x squared. X times 3 divided by x, the x's are going to cancel and we're going to be left with 3 is equal to 4 times x, which is 4x. Now that we have a quadratic, we need to move everything to one side, so I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides. X squared minus 4x plus 3 equals 0. I need to factor what multiplies to 3 and adds to negative 4, negative 3 and negative 1. So we have x minus 3 times x minus 1 equals 0. What do I do with each factor? I set them equal to 0 and solve. So x minus 3 equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0, x equals 1, and x equals 3. Before we can say those are our two solutions, we need to plug it back in and check. So we're plugging into our original equation, 3 plus 3 over 3 equals 4. Does 3 plus 1 equal 4? Yes. So x equals 3 is a solution. Then I try 1. 1 plus 3 over 1 is equal to 4. 1 plus 3 is equal to 4. Yes, that works, so 1 is also a solution. Now, this one's a little bit more difficult because our denominator is x minus 4. So what we need to multiply on to our whole equation is x minus 4 instead of just that x. So I'm multiplying by x minus 4 on both sides. And I get x minus 4 times x plus 1 equals 0. The x minus 4 and the x minus 4 cancel when I multiply to here. Distribute x squared minus 4x plus 1 equals 0. We multiply to 1 and add to negative 4? No. So we can't factor. Here we need to use our quadratic, which is negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We have to remember that a is equal to 1, b is equal to negative 4, and c is equal to 1. We plug in. Therefore, x is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 all over 2 times 1. 4 plus or minus the square root. Negative 4 squared is 16 minus 4, which is 12, all over 2. And then we would take negative 12, split it up into 4 and 3. We know the square root of 4 is 2. So 4 plus or minus 2 root 3 over 2. Divide by 2 to both terms, so 2 plus or minus root 3 would be our answers. If we separated that, it would be 2 plus root 3 and 2 minus root 3. If we took these values and put them into our calculator, we could do 2 plus root 3 and 2 minus root 3 to get 0. To get values of 3.732 and 0.26979. If you were to graph this function, you could see that that's the approximate values. So x is equal to that for our check, so we don't have to plug that in. In order to solve this type of an equation, we need to factor. So we have different denominators, so we need to figure out what's the most efficient thing we can multiply by in order to cancel all of our denominators. So we're first going to factor this, what multiplies to 3 and adds to negative 4, and it is x minus 3 times x minus 1. So now I can see that I have an x minus 1, I have an x minus 3, and then I have an x minus 3 and an x minus 1. So if I want to cancel all of these by multiplying by one thing, so my whole equation, I'm going to multiply by the least common denominator, which is x minus 3 times x minus 1. So in every numerator, I'm multiplying by x minus 3 and x minus 1. And now we have to see what is going to cancel. In my first fraction, the x minus 1's cancel. And I'm left with 2x times x minus 3. My second fraction, the x minus 3's cancel. I'm left with 1 times x minus 1, so plus 1, which is just x minus 1, is equal to the x minus 3 cancels with the x minus 3, x minus 1 cancels with x minus 1, therefore I'm just left with 2. And now we can solve, so I distribute the 2x squared minus 6x plus x minus 1 equals 2. Simplify 2x squared minus 5x, I'm going to subtract 2, minus 3 equals 0. Factor what multiplies to negative 6 and adds to negative 5, negative 6 and 1. Since I have an a value, I have to do 2x minus 6 and 2x plus 1. I can divide this factor by 2, which means my first factor is going to be x minus 3 times 2x plus 1 is equal to 0. And now set each factor equal to 0. X minus 3 equals 0, x equals 3. 2x plus 1 equals 0. X equals negative 1/2. Before I say that either of these are my solution, I need to check and plug them in to the original function. I'm sorry, the original equation. So 2 times 3 is 6. over 3 minus 1, which is 2, plus 1 over 3 minus 3, which is equal to 2 over 3 squared minus 4 times 3 plus 3. What is going to happen if we have a 3 minus 3? That means I'm going to divide by 0, which is undefined, so I can't do this, therefore this is not a solution. And if this is not a solution, this is called extraneous. Let's try negative 1/2. 2 times negative 1/2 over negative 1/2 minus 1 plus 1 over negative 1/2 minus 3. 2 times negative 1/2 is negative 1 over negative 1/2 minus 1. This is like 2 over 2, which is negative 3 over 2. A negative over negative is a positive. 1 divided by 3 over 2 is 2/3. This 3 is like 1 over negative 1/2 minus 6 over 2, which is 1 over negative 7 over 2. And I would flip that fraction because I'm dividing by a fraction to get minus 2 over 7. You need common denominators. (14 minus 6). Now we have to check the other side. 2 over negative 1/2 squared minus 4 times negative 1/2 plus 3. I'm going to just put this in the calculator for you. Negative 0.5 squared minus 4 times negative 0.5 plus 3. 2 divided by second answer. And is that the same as 8 over 21? Yes, it is. Therefore, negative 1/2 is your solution. Always remember to check your answers. We already checked ours here. And that is all for today.